How'd you get here so fast? One for him, too. Hi. Hi there. That's a gold coin. Hey, do any of you guys, I have a weird question for you today. Do any of you guys have, like, scars on your body? Any cuts that you go, oh, yeah, I got a good one? Like, see, I got a good one right there. That's a pretty good one. You like that one? You have one? You have one? Oh, they're gone? Really? Let me see where. Seriously? 4 times? Is there, oh, there's a scar. Do you mind if I measure, do you have a scar? Do you have a scar like that?
He used to.
Yeah? Yeah? Oh, and it's okay now? Good, I'm glad it's okay. Can I measure your scar? Let's see here. Can you guys see that? Can you kneel down? I mean, normally I don't need people to get that low, but look at this. Look at this scar. Look right here. Do you see that? That's a beaut. Really, 100 times? You've only done it 4 times? You got to catch up. He's done it 100 times. Hey, let's measure this. Let's measure this. How? Okay, so right there, I would say that's like 5/16 of an inch. That's a pretty good scar for your head. I mean, that's a really good scar for. I wonder. 5/16. That's what we said, right? 5/16. It was right here. 5/16. That's a pretty good scar. I wonder how, in comparison to your total height, that is. You want to find out? All right. And how are you guys on math? I know it's Christmas break and you don't think, oh, I know, math. Oh, my goodness. Math, here, stretch that out. Help me, help me, help me. We're up to, let's see. Okay, are we close? You're 54. Oh, well, you're about 55 inches. 55 inches. How many 16ths of an inch is 55 inches? I need to find that out. Come on. I get my calculator on my phone here, just saying. Give me I mean, you don't, what do you mean I'm an English teacher? 55 times 16. No calculators allowed. Can you do better than that? Yeah, that's what I thought, mockers. Bunch of mockers. Okay, so if I go 55 times 16, that'll give me, you're 880 16ths of an inch. And how long was your scar? How many 16ths? I think it was 15. 15, that'd be almost an inch. I don't think it was an inch, it was 5. And his total height is 880 16ths of an inch. I know, we haven't done least common denominator. I know that term. All right? So when you think about how big your scar is, was this a big scar? I mean, did you bleed a lot? Did you bleed when you hit your head 100 times? Oh, just a bang and a bump? Yeah. And how about your knee? Did it bleed a lot? A big one. Like how long do you think it was? It was this big on your knee? It was this big? It went around twice. It went around twice, didn't it? I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot. All right, so you have a cut that was, a scar, beautiful scar. You should be proud of that scar. That's 5/16 of an inch, but you are 880 16ths of an inch. So is that scar a big scar? Was it a big scar when it was bleeding? Yeah. Head wound, lots of blood. Knee wound, goes around your knee like 4 times. That's a lot of blood. That's a big scar. But compared to, how long was your cut? Your cut was like this long on your knee? Yeah, that long. But when it's compared to you, oh, that problem you had wasn't quite as big as you are. Half of your leg. Half your leg. And your leg's about half of you, of that part of your leg.
It was this
Yeah. See, here's what I want you guys to learn today. A scar that's this big, when it's bleeding, oh my goodness, it's like huge because it's bleeding, because it hurts, because you need your mama, it's big. But later, once it heals, it's this big. Oh, no, don't look down. No, look right here. It's this big. And you're this big. It's this big. And you're like this big. Once it heals, it's just not as big. It doesn't feel as big. Now, here's the funny thing. Does God know that you hit your head and like 5 times and broke your head open, and you hit your head 100 times and you had a cut on your leg? Does God know you used to have a scar on your hand? Does God know that? Yeah. Is it a big deal to God? Yeah. But in the long run, he's going to heal it. And it's going to be okay. And then it's going to seem little after it's healed. God likes to heal. That's what I want you to learn today. Now, I already saw you do it. I forgot to do it in the beginning. Is it still up there? Yeah. You did a good job of getting that up there. That was like amazing. That was great. All right. Can I pray with you guys? God, part of what's going to happen with these kids and has happened to us adults is we are going to get injured. And sometimes it's going to be a head wound, and sometimes a knee wound, sometimes a hand, sometimes our heart, sometimes other situations. And those problems will seem big when they're going on, but you are a healing God. And once we heal, we look back at them and say, okay, it was big when I was bleeding, but God healed me. Thank you for being bigger than our injuries and for healing us. And thank you for these kids who keep teaching us things week after week. Amen. Thank you, guys. Be seated. I'm going to pray for us, and then we're going to look into God's Word. Father, I really like the fact that the Sunday after Christmas, we're still singing about your coming. One of the things that's a little difficult for us is to extend the truth of your reality that you came to be Emmanuel, God with us, not just the weeks approaching Christmas and Christmas. You came to be Emmanuel, God with us forever. So the singing of hymns that exalt that and carols that exalt that, they just remind us of who you are and what your plan is. Thank you for that plan. Now will you help us to see with our eyes and believe in our hearts the message that you have for us from your ancient writings, inspired by the Holy Spirit and preserved for thousands of years. Teach us and meet us at our individual points of need, because that's what we need to have happen. We pray in your name. Amen. I don't remember how many years ago, sometime in the last 10 years, one of my summer jobs was I hired on with a framing crew to do the side of construction I've never done. I've always done the painting part of it, but this was rough framing on a 3,000 square foot house. This is a big job, and I was the rookie on the job. And they introduced me to framing nailers. I showed up on the job site day one with a tool belt and a hammer, and they kind of looked at me. And then they handed me this gun that can shoot a nail 50 yards and put it into a tree at 50 yards. We used to do that at lunchtime. That was kind of fun. And there were several guns available to me. One of the guns I called the Stallion. It was too much for me to handle. But then there was a gun I called the Gelding, and I could handle the Gelding. And so my job, after learning a little bit that summer, was I would be laying out the walls, cutting the wood, the header, the footer, and then the 2x4s go in, measuring them and cutting them on the saw, and then laying them out on the ground. I always thought you put one board up at a time. I was such a rookie. And found out you build the wall on the deck, and then you lean it up and put it in place. And so here I was with the Gelding in my hand, and I had my header and my footer cut, and I had all the 2x4s marked and ready to go. And what you do is you just grab a 2x4 and you butt it up against, you put the header against, and then boom. And the nailers are so powerful. I mean, they're scary powerful, because you have a trigger, but you also have the nose of the nailer. When it hits, if you're not holding the trigger and you hit it, nothing's going to happen. And if you just hit it without the trigger, nothing's going to happen. But you have to get the timing down. And so you, bam, oh, that just shot a nail 50 yards deep but it doesn't go 50 yards deep because the wood catches it. But you have to be really careful, I found out that summer, because sometimes when you come in and you get the timing just right, you're so frozen on the trigger that when you hit it, it'll recoil and you go like that. All of a sudden, you shot 2 nails. One time, when I hit it, the one nail, boom, it attached those 2 boards beautifully, like my slow motion. And then it recoiled and boom, it hit again, only I was just above the 2x4, so that nail started flying 50 yards in that direction and caught my hand along the way. And I have a good scar. That is 9/16, and it's been there for 10 years. Mine isn't going away. I got a good souvenir of being a rookie nailer, and it was like 11/16. I mean, that's a big one. Now, I already did this measurement, so I don't need to like get this whole thing out and measure me. I'm 5'4". I used to be 5'6", but gravity is working. And I'm 5'4". That means I am 1,024/16 of an inch. You know what? 11/16, that's a good scar. When you say goodbye to me today, ask to look. I'll show you that scar. That's a good one. I mean, it's a good one. It's a good one. I'm proud of this scar. Compared to 1,024/16 of an inch, this is nothing. It wasn't nothing when I was bleeding all over wood on a construction site as the rookie, and now they're going to come over and ask me what was going on. The gelding got me, I said. The gelding got me. It wasn't little when I was bleeding and in pain. Now it's a good souvenir. During Advent, we've been spending a lot of time in Isaiah chapter 40, and we're going to continue to spend some time in this prophet's book, just in this chapter, Isaiah chapter 40. And in Isaiah chapter 40, some of you, we have some visitors today, so I want to catch you guys up. And some of the rest of you, it's just I got to keep writing this theme. In Isaiah chapter 40, you catch up with the nation of Israel. They are in the middle of 300 years of enemy occupation. They're in exile. It's been so long since good was part of their experience that they don't even know what hope is. It's just they can't even remember hope. And they can't look forward and see hope. It's been so long since good has been part of their formula, they can't perceive where peace is going to come from. It has been so long since good is part of their formula. I would guess that they don't even know if joy is in their prospect. That's kind of where these people are. They're in a pretty sad situation. And so when the writer of the nation of Israel, when Isaiah writes to them as a prophet and tries to give them hope and the prospect of peace and the concept that joy is in their future, he turns his attention to this concept of love. And he says, you need to know who your Redeemer is, even though you can't imagine that he's coming. And we talked about this on Christmas Eve, but I want to take you back there. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 11, the prophet goes metaphorical, and here's what he says about the bringer of hope and peace and joy. He's a God of love. Look at verse 11. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms, and he carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. When the writer of Isaiah wanted to communicate to a group of people who can't even remember hope and who can't look out and see any hope of redemption or a change of situation, what he does is he goes metaphorical and he goes, Jesus is going to be like a shepherd, and he's going to scoop up the lambs that wander off for whatever reason, that are isolated from the flock for whatever reason, and he's going to hold them close to his heart, and he's going to walk them back to the flock. That's what the Redeemer is. What an amazing, amazing concept for people who are 300 years in exile and really can't perceive of hope and joy and peace. Now I want to outline for you the rest of the chapter, because it's really interesting to me what Isaiah does for the rest of the chapter, and I just want to give you the big view. I think that might help. For the rest of the chapter, what Isaiah is going to do after saying to them, your Redeemer is a Redeemer of love. He's a shepherd that holds lambs close to his heart. After he says that, he then goes into this series of rhetorical questions. You know rhetorical questions. They're so obvious that you don't answer them because they're just that obvious. And for the rest of the chapter, 6 different times he's going to ask rhetorical questions. And like verses 12 through 17, he's going to ask rhetorical questions, and then he's going to tell you how big God is. And then he's going to ask more rhetorical questions in verses 18 and 19. And then he's going to say, and what you're looking at there is false hope. And then he's going to ask rhetorical questions. And then he's going to talk about God being powerful over your problems. And then he's going to ask more rhetorical questions. And he's going to point to creation. And then he's going to ask rhetorical questions in the last 3 or 4 verses of the chapter. And he's going to say, and here is God's promise. It's this beautiful chapter strung together by rhetorical questions. This morning, I just want to look at the first set of rhetorical questions. So we need to read a little bit, starting in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 11, to get that lamb shepherd metaphor, and then the first set of rhetorical questions. Look at verse 11. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms, and he carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand? Or with the breadth of his hand marked off the heavens? Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket, or weighed the mountains on the scales and the hills in a balance? Who has understood the mind of the Lord, or instructed him as instructed him as his counselor? Whom did the Lord consult to enlighten him? And who has taught him the right way? Who was it that taught him knowledge and showed him the path of understanding? Surely the nations are like a drop in the bucket. They are regarded as dust on the scales. He weighs the islands as though they were fine dust. Lebanon is not sufficient for altar fires, nor its animals enough for burnt offerings. Before him all the nations are as nothing. They are regarded by him as worthless, as less than nothing. You notice at the beginning, he's talking about the size of God, and the beginning of these rhetorical questions, he says, who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand? Who's taken the Atlantic and the Pacific and all the oceans and all the water of the streams and every lake and pond, and who's just like, I got it all right here? Who has done that? Rhetorical question that doesn't need an answer. Then he goes on to the next one. Who has marked out the heaven with the breadth of his hand before they had rulers or tape measures? Who has marked out the heavens with the breadth of his hand? Who's done that? Then he asks a third rhetorical question. Who has held all of the dirt of the entire universe in one Longaberger basket? Who has a Longaberger basket big enough for that one? And who could pick it up if he does? Then he asks the last rhetorical question. Who has weighed the mountains on the scales? Who's put them in the balance? All these rhetorical questions. Have you done any of that? Of course not. It's rhetorical. You don't need, it's an obvious answer. I like going to Boston. Linda and I have done a lot of vacations to Boston, and I've taken students on educational tours to Boston several times. There is a bridge I always like to show off when I get to Boston. It's the Harvard Bridge. Boston is the city that's here, and then there's the Charles River, and then Cambridge is right here. And it feels like the same city. If you didn't know you were in a different city, you wouldn't know. But the downtown area of Boston, Fenway Park, all of that's over here. Then the Harvard Bridge over the Charles River, and Harvard University and MIT and all the intelligence is over here. And one night back in 1961, there was this freshman fraternity pledge. His name is Oliver Smoot. And in 1961, I kind of wonder if alcohol may have been part of this little experiment. One night, this freshman recruit, Smoot, 5'7", he's a tall guy, they took Smoot out, and they laid him down at the one edge of the Harvard Bridge, his heels still in Boston and his head starting onto the bridge, and they laid him down. And they made a little mark. Then they laid him down, and they made a little mark. And they measured the bridge in smoots. It's like known today because there are every 10 smoots, there's a line painted on the bridge, and every year it's repainted by the MIT fraternity boys, and they just keep, oh, I know, you want to know, it's 364.4 smoots plus one ear. That's how long it takes to get across from Boston to Cambridge on the Harvard Bridge. I knew you'd want to know that if you ever go there. Do we have any in our attendance rolls? Do we have anybody by the last name Smoot? Okay, so that's not going to work. You know what? I'm shocked that so many of you are here on this cold, snowy morning. Really glad. But if you're not here on a Sunday, you get picked on. So Jerry Benedict, we're going to use her as our next measurement. Jerry Benedict is about, 49 inches tall, all right? 49 inches tall. I measured her. 49 inches tall. Here's what I'd like to know. I'd like to know by next Sunday how many Benedicts it is from your front door to the front door of the church. So sometime this week, just go borrow Jerry and just heel to head, measure all the way to Pickler, Versailles, or Michigan. Just borrow her and get her laid out there and see how many Benedicts it is. That's your homework. Who would measure from the front door of the church to your front door in Benedicts? That's kind of what Isaiah is saying to these people. Do you really think that God actually measured out the heavens in his hand? Or is he just so huge that he could measure it out in the heavens in his hand? Do you really think God actually went, okay, and a little more Pacific and a little more Atlantic and put the water in his hands? No. But his hands are so huge. God is such an enormous being that he can get a Longaberger basket big enough to put all the dirt of the entire universe, Mount Everest, the Smoky Mountains, the Swiss Alps, all in one basket. He's big enough to carry it. That's what the author is saying here. God is just amazingly huge. It's important to remember your context. Whenever you're looking at Scripture, it's important to remember your context. Your context is this. We've got a group of people who are in the middle of 300 years of hopelessness. And Isaiah just said to them, do you understand who your Redeemer is? He's the kind of Redeemer that scoops forgotten people, hurting people, wandering people up, and he holds them close to his heart. And then he leaves that metaphor behind, and he goes, do you understand how big God is? And then the rhetorical questions continue, and this time it's not about God's size, it's actually about God's intelligence, God's intellectual capacity. Look at verse 13. Who has understood the mind of the Lord? Or who has instructed him as counselor? Whom did the Lord consult to enlighten him? Who has taught him the right way? Who has taught him knowledge? Who showed him the path of understanding? Yes, rhetorical questions. We don't need to answer them because they're so obviously rhetorical. So for my day job, I teach rhetoric. I teach what you used to call English or literature and writing. That's what I do. And when I look at this passage, things just glow off the page to me from a rhetoric standpoint. So I gave myself 7 minutes to do a little analysis starting at verse 13 and going down through 14, just a couple of verses. But here's what I found out. I found out that Isaiah employs anaphora to propose 11 rhetorical questions in just 4 compound sentences. And he shifts from metaphorical comparison to literal questions, but he does so by signaling the transition with perfect balances of pairings, and then he has one tricolon in order to make the switch. And he uses parallelism, inviting the reader to this barrage of philosophical questions that grow from the heart of theology. And but he does it in such a way that Isaiah's base diction allows the most common untrained reader to answer 11 rhetorical questions with the same answer that an adolescent in trouble uses with a parent. Do you follow that? Then let me just ask one of the rhetorical questions, and I will prove my point. Who has understood the mind of the Lord? It wasn't me. Isn't that what an adolescent says when they're in trouble with mom and dad? It wasn't me, it was my sister. It wasn't me, it was him over there. Everything that I told you about the rhetoric is true, and it's obvious to me, and it's not because I'm better than you. It's that I'm trained in rhetoric, and I know what to look for, and I did 7 minutes of analysis and saw how the author put it together. It's not a statement of arrogance that all those things that I told you are true, and it doesn't even matter that you don't understand it because you're not trained in rhetoric like I am. That's kind of the point of the passage. The questions are really simple. Who told God what's up? Who was the one that taught God the alphabet? Who is the one that taught God something called a least common denominator? Who was the engineer that kind of laid out the plan for the universe? And the answer every single time, the rhetorical answer is, it wasn't me. No, it wasn't. Because you're not as smart as God. It's not that God's being arrogant saying, say, I'm so much smarter than you are. No. It's just, that's in his wheelhouse. He has such intellectual capacity. Remember, in Bible study, it's important to remember your context. Your context is this is written to a bunch of people who are in the middle of 300 years of hopelessness. They can't perceive where peace is coming from. They don't even know if joy is in their future, but they've been told, verse 11, your Redeemer, when he comes, is like a shepherd who scoops up a hurting lamb, a lost lamb, and that shepherd holds him close to his heart. And you know how strong that shepherd is? Well, he's pretty big. He measures the sky with his hands. He holds his basket and has all the dirt of the universe in it. In his hand, he can hold all the water from the entire globe. And he's smart. He's so smart he didn't need you to tell him what to do. The next little part, verses 15, 16, and 17, it's so easy to not get it, but once you get it, it's so powerful. So I just need to show you this before we land this plane. Then he dumps the metaphorical language, and Isaiah says this, surely the nations are like a drop in a bucket. The nations are regarded as dust on the scale. He weighs the islands as though they were fine dust. Lebanon isn't big enough. Not enough animals. You see all that? What's he talking about? Well, wait, who's he talking to? People who are in exile. When he says, verse 15, surely the nations are like a drop in the bucket. They're just like dust on a scale. Who are those nations he's talking about? Is he saying, Israel, you're just a drop in the bucket. God doesn't care about you. You're just one drop in a whole gallon. No. The nations he's talking about, that's Babylon. That's Assyria. These are the enemies of Israel. These are the ones that are creating 300 years of hopelessness for them. Once you realize that, when you plug it back in, you look at verse 15 and look, listen, just do this. In your mind, look at verse 15, and every time it says nation or island or a pronoun like they referring to it, realize he's talking about the problem. For me, the problem is grief and sadness. For you, the problem isn't grief and sadness, it's something else. Read it that way. Surely, verse 15, the grief is like a drop in a bucket. The problem you're struggling with is like dust on a scale. Your lousy diagnosis that the doctor gave you, it's nothing compared to this God who is so big he measures the universe with his hands, and he's so strong that he can hold it all in a basket, and he's so smart he's not confused by your problem. So for a group of people who are in the middle of 300 years of they can't even perceive hope or joy or peace, they find out that the Redeemer is so powerful that the enemy that they're fighting is nothing to him. It might be everything to them. It might be a scar that's going to last. It might be bleeding like mad right now, but the Redeemer is the Redeemer that will heal it. And he's the kind of Redeemer that scoops them up like lambs and holds them close to their heart, to his heart. I have to take you to the end of the chapter. because he's going to continue the rhetorical questions until finally he delivers the healing. And the healing is delivered starting at verse 28. You have to see where it's going to end up. Verse 28, do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God. He's the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary. He increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. I've fallen in love with this chapter. But I got to tell you the truth, I've fallen in love with it by faith. Because I, like some of you, not all of you, but like some of you, are still in the middle of the 300 years. And we have to take by faith, not because it feels like it when you're bleeding. You have to take by faith that God is a shepherd who scoops his lambs up and holds them close to his heart. And God will eventually, the metaphor gets a little confused, God will eventually take those little sheep and will make them mount on wings like eagles and fly. That's Isaiah chapter 40. May God add his blessing to the reading and explanation of his word.